Imagine waking in the middle of the night, not from a nightmare or a sound that startled you, but naturally, your body deciding that 4 hours of sleep was enough for now. The room around you is dark, but not silent. The breathing of family members, the distant call of a night watchman, perhaps the soft crackle of dying embers in the hearth. You're not alarmed by this wakefulness. In fact, you expected it. This midnight waking wasn't insomnia to your medieval ancestors, it was normal. For them, the night wasn't a single, unbroken period of unconsciousness, but rather two distinct sleeps, with a wakeful interval between. What if everything you know about sleep is wrong? What if the 8-hour consolidated sleep pattern we consider natural today is actually a recent invention, a product of electric light and industrial schedules rather than human biology? The evidence suggests exactly that. For thousands of years, across continents and cultures, humans didn't sleep the way we do now. They slept twice each night, with a period of quiet wakefulness in between. Imagine darkness so complete, it feels like a physical presence, a darkness our modern world has almost entirely banished. No streetlights bleeding through curtains, no digital clock faces glowing, no distant hum of traffic, just profound darkness punctuated perhaps by firelight, if you could afford the fuel. Now imagine this darkness lasting not for 8 hours, but for 14, 16, even 18 hours during northern European winters. How would you adapt? What would your relationship with darkness become when it claimed half your existence? The answer lies in a sleep pattern so fundamental to human experience that it was rarely documented explicitly, because like breathing, it needed no explanation. Until quite suddenly, it vanished from human practice so completely that we forgot it had ever existed. This is the story of how our ancestors mastered the long darkness, not by conquering it with artificial light, but by adapting to it with a segmented sleep pattern that modern science is only now rediscovering. It's a story that challenges our assumptions about what's natural and reveals how profoundly our relationship with night has changed in just a few centuries. The medieval night contained terrors, yes, but also intimacy, productivity, spirituality, and a different kind of consciousness our modern world rarely experiences. By understanding how our ancestors navigated their nights, we might recover something valuable our illuminated world has lost. What did they call this pattern? Court records, diaries, and medical texts from across Europe referred to it as first sleep and second sleep, with a period in between simply known as the watch or the watching. And during this midnight vigil, a different kind of life unfolded. The historical record is clear. For most of human history, we did not sleep as we do now. And the implications of this forgotten rhythm reach into every aspect of how we understand human nature itself. This journey into medieval darkness will challenge everything you thought you knew about sleep, night, and perhaps even consciousness itself. Before we plunge into the medieval night, we should establish what this exploration is and isn't. This isn't a romantic vision of candlelit evenings and cosy hearths. The reality was far harsher, more complex and more pragmatic than modern reimaginings often suggest. We'll be examining primarily northern European experiences from roughly 1200 to 1600 CE, though the segmented sleep pattern itself appears to have been nearly universal across pre-industrial societies. We'll rely on court records, medical texts, literary sources, archaeological evidence, and surviving diaries and correspondence. Where evidence is fragmentary or contradictory, we'll acknowledge those limitations. Regional variations were significant. Sleep in Mediterranean climates differed from Scandinavian practices, urban patterns from rural ones, aristocratic habits from peasant necessities. Our focus will be on the logistics of survival, how people managed extended darkness with limited resources, rather than on romanticised notions of medieval life. The medieval night was not merely an inconvenience, it was a daily challenge that required sophisticated adaptation strategies, many of which have been lost to our modern understanding. This is a story about human adaptation to environmental constraints, about the plasticity of human behaviour, and about how profoundly our relationship with darkness has changed in just a few centuries. It's also about what we might have lost, when artificial light transformed our nights and consolidated our sleep. The segmented sleep pattern wasn't a cultural curiosity. It was a survival strategy, a social necessity, and possibly the natural rhythm of human consciousness when allowed to unfold without artificial light. Understanding it helps us understand not just medieval life, but potentially our own biology as well. How do we know our ancestors slept in two distinct phases? The evidence has been hiding in plain sight for centuries, scattered across diverse historical sources that rarely attracted scholarly attention until recently. The breakthrough came largely through the work of historian A. Roger E. Kirch, who uncovered more than 500 references to segmented sleep patterns in historical documents. What's remarkable isn't just the volume of evidence, but its consistency across different types of sources and geographical regions. Court records provide some of our most vivid glimpses into medieval nights. When witnesses testified about events occurring after dark, they frequently situated them between first sleep and second sleep, without feeling any need to explain these terms. In a 1324 court case from England, a witness described hearing suspicious noises after the end of his first sleep. In French legal records, the phrase première somme, first sleep, appears regularly. These casual references suggest a common understanding that required no elaboration. Medical texts from the period treated segmented sleep as the natural human condition. The influential 16th century French physician Laurent Joubert wrote of the first sleep and second sleep as normal phases of the night. Medical advice often recommended specific activities appropriate for the watching period between sleeps, and some remedies were specifically designed to be taken after first sleep. Literary sources abound with references to this sleep pattern. Geoffrey Chaucer's The Squire's Tale mentions a character awakening after her first sleep. Similar references appear in the Canterbury Tales and numerous other medieval works. In Don Quixote, Miguel de Cervantes writes of the night awakening after his first sleep and not returning to his second sleep. These references span centuries and cultures, appearing in English, French, Italian and Spanish literature. Prayer books and monastic rules provide further evidence. Many religious practices were specifically designed around this sleep pattern, with certain prayers designated for the period between sleeps. The rule of Saint Benedict, which structured monastic life throughout medieval Europe, prescribed a night office that divided the monk's sleep into two segments. Household accounts and inventories indirectly confirm this pattern through the provisions made for midnight waking, special foods, small amounts of drink, and fuel allocations specifically for the middle of the night. Perhaps most telling are the personal diaries and correspondence that survived from the late medieval and early modern periods. These intimate accounts describe midnight waking not as insomnia or disruption, but as a normal part of the night's rhythm. A 16th century physician's diary describes his regular practice of studying between his first and second sleeps. A French peasant's journal mentions conversations with his wife during the watching period. The pattern these sources collectively describe is remarkably consistent. People would go to bed a few hours after dusk, sleep for 3 to 4 hours, first sleep, wake for 1 to 3 hours, the watch or the watching, and then return to sleep until dawn, second sleep. What's striking is how unremarkable this pattern seemed to contemporaries. It wasn't presented as a cultural peculiarity or a local custom, but rather as the natural way humans experienced night. The evidence suggests this wasn't just a European phenomenon. Similar patterns have been documented in pre-industrial societies across Africa, South America, and the Middle East. This wasn't insomnia. It was a structured approach to the night that divided darkness into manageable segments and created space for activities that couldn't be accommodated during daylight hours. And it was so fundamental to human experience that it needed no explanation, until it disappeared so completely that modern historians had to rediscover it. The historical record is clear. Segmented sleep wasn't an anomaly, it was the norm for most of human history. The real anomaly is our modern expectation of 8 hours of consolidated unconsciousness. To understand why segmented sleep made sense, we must first grasp the fundamental challenge our ancestors faced: extraordinarily long nights. In Northern Europe during winter, darkness could claim 14 to 16 hours of each 24-hour cycle, sometimes more in the northernmost regions. Consider a December day in the 15th century in England. The sun might rise around 8 a.m. and set by 3 p.m. That's just 7.5 hours of daylight, leaving 16.5 hours of darkness. Even accounting for twilight, useful light for most tasks lasted perhaps 8 hours. The remaining 2/3 of the day and night would unfold in varying degrees of darkness. This wasn't a short-term hardship, but a seasonal reality lasting months. From approximately October through March, darkness dominated the daily experience. In more northern regions like Scotland or Scandinavia, winter days could shrink to just 6 hours or less. How would you spend half your life in darkness? This wasn't a hypothetical question for medieval people. It was their lived reality for nearly half the year. Modern people rarely experience true darkness. Even in rural areas today, light pollution from distant cities creates a perpetual twilight. But medieval darkness was profound, so complete that, without a moon, you literally could not see your hand before your face. This darkness transformed familiar landscapes into alien territories, where navigation relied on memory, touch and sound rather than sight. The practical challenges were immense. Most productive labour required daylight. Food preparation, maintenance tasks, travel, and trade all became difficult or impossible after sunset. Water had to be collected during daylight hours. Firewood needed to be gathered and processed. Essential repairs couldn't wait for the brief window of winter daylight. Even basic safety became a concern. Court records reveal countless accidents attributed to darkness: falls, collisions, injuries from unseen hazards. A simple trip to an outdoor privy could become dangerous. Navigation through homes required careful memory of layouts and obstacle positions. This darkness wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an economic constraint. Productive hours were severely limited during winter months. The cost was measured not just in comfort, but in survival capacity. Every task that required visual acuity had to be compressed into the brief daylight hours, creating immense pressure on time management. For agricultural communities, winter darkness meant a dramatic shift in daily rhythms. Summer might see people working from dawn until dusk, perhaps 16 hours of labour. But winter compressed productive time to a fraction of that. Adaptation wasn't optional, it was essential. Urban dwellers faced different but equally significant challenges. Town curfews often began at sunset, restricting movement and activities. Craft production requiring precision had to cease when light failed. Commerce largely halted after dark. The functional day contracted dramatically. What's remarkable isn't that medieval people struggled with darkness, it's how successfully they adapted to it. Rather than fighting against the darkness by trying to extend artificial light, which was prohibitively expensive for most, they developed a complex relationship with night that incorporated it into their lives. Segmented sleep was part of this adaptation. Instead of trying to remain unconscious throughout the entire 16-hour night, which would have been biologically challenging and practically wasteful, they broke the night into manageable segments interspersed with useful wakefulness. This wasn't just a cultural practice, it was a survival strategy that maximised limited resources and aligned with human biological capabilities. The long night problem demanded a solution, and segmented sleep provided it. Your body remembers what your mind has forgotten. When modern humans are placed in environments that mimic pre-industrial lighting conditions, with no artificial light after sunset, a remarkable thing happens. Many naturally fall into a segmented sleep pattern, remarkably similar to what historical documents describe. The biology of extended darkness reveals why our ancestors' sleep patterns made sense. The human body produces melatonin in response to darkness, signalling sleep readiness. But in conditions of extended darkness, like those 16-hour winter nights, melatonin production follows a more complex pattern than our modern experience suggests. Research indicates that when humans experience extended darkness without artificial light interference, melatonin doesn't simply rise at dusk and fall at dawn. Instead, it often shows a bimodal pattern, rising for several hours, slightly decreasing during the middle of the night, then rising again before dawn. This hormonal pattern creates a natural tendency towards segmented sleep. Our circadian rhythm, the internal clock regulating sleep-wake cycles, evolved under conditions where darkness lasted much longer than our modern 7 to 8 hour sleep periods. When modern subjects are placed in environments mimicking pre-industrial lighting, with only fire or candle after sunset, many spontaneously adopt a segmented sleep pattern within weeks, suggesting our bodies retain this ancient programming. The midnight waking period brings distinctive neurochemistry. The pituitary gland often releases higher levels of prolactin during this time, a hormone associated with a sense of peace, and sometimes mild hallucinations or vivid imagery. Historical accounts of the watching period frequently mention a distinctive state of consciousness, not quite dreaming, but more contemplative and receptive than daytime wakefulness. Temperature regulation also plays a role. The human body naturally reaches its lowest core temperature roughly 2/3 of the way through the night, often corresponding to the end of first sleep in historical accounts. This temperature minimum creates a natural waking point for many people, even today. Medieval people were acutely aware of their body's responses to darkness, even without understanding the underlying biology. Medical texts from the period frequently discuss the cooling effects of night and recommend practices to maintain health during extended darkness. They recognized that different parts of the night brought different physical and mental states. Sleep researchers have found that the watching period between first and second sleep often produces distinctive brainwave patterns, similar to certain meditative states, with heightened alpha wave activity. This may explain historical descriptions of this time as particularly suited for reflection, prayer, and creative thinking. For medieval people, these biological responses weren't fighting against cultural practices, they were perfectly aligned with them. The segmented sleep pattern matched the body's natural tendencies under conditions of extended darkness. It wasn't a cultural imposition, but a biological adaptation. What's unnatural from this perspective is our modern insistence on consolidating sleep into a single block. Electric lighting has overridden our body's natural responses to darkness, forcing a sleep pattern that, while convenient for industrial schedules, may not align with our evolutionary programming. This mismatch between our biological inheritance and our modern sleep expectations may help explain the prevalence of sleep disorders in contemporary society. We're not just fighting cultural expectations when we wake at 3 a.m. We may be fighting our own biology. The medieval experience of night, while challenging in many ways, may have been more aligned with human physiology than our artificially illuminated modern nights. Our ancestors weren't just adapting culturally to darkness, they were working with their body's natural responses to it. To truly understand medieval nights, we must confront a stark economic reality. Artificial light was extraordinarily expensive. The economics of illumination shaped every aspect of nocturnal life, and made segmented sleep not just biologically natural, but financially necessary. Consider the humble candle, a luxury item for most medieval households. A single tallow candle, made from animal fat, might cost a labourer half a day's wages in the 14th century. Beeswax candles, which burned cleaner and brighter, could cost 10 times as much, placing them firmly beyond reach for all but the wealthy. A servant might work an entire day to earn enough for 1 hour of candlelight. The mathematics of medieval lighting was brutal. Records from English manors suggest that even prosperous households budgeted candles carefully, using perhaps 2 to 4 per week during winter months. For peasant families, a single candle might need to last several days, used only for essential tasks requiring light. Fire provided the primary illumination for most households, but this too carried significant costs. A typical medieval home in Northern Europe might require 10 to 15 cords of firewood annually for heating, and cooking, representing weeks of labour to gather, cut and stack. During winter, a family might burn 30 to 50 pounds of wood daily just to maintain minimal warmth. This fuel had to be gathered during summer and autumn months, competing with agricultural labour demands. Deforestation around population centres meant increasingly long journeys to collect wood. By the 13th century, many European regions faced serious wood shortages, driving prices upward and forcing poorer households to burn less efficient fuels like peat, straw or dried dung. The oil lamp offered an alternative but brought its own economic constraints. Olive oil in Mediterranean regions or fish oil in northern areas burned cleaner than tallow but cost significantly more. A simple ceramic lamp might burn an ounce of oil per hour, oil that could otherwise nourish the family. The choice to illuminate often literally meant choosing light over food. These economic realities created a hierarchy of illumination that precisely mirrored social class. Aristocratic homes might blaze with dozens of beeswax candles and multiple hearths. Merchant households used tallow candles strategically for specific tasks. Craftspeople might use rushlight, dried reeds dipped in fat, providing dim illumination at lower cost. Peasant families often had only the hearth fire, carefully maintained at the lowest level, that would preserve the embers until morning. Court records and household accounts reveal the extraordinary value placed on lighting materials. Candle theft was treated as a serious crime. Servants were monitored to prevent unauthorized use of lighting resources. Even monasteries, relatively wealthy institutions, had strict rules governing candle use. The practical consequence was that most people spent most night hours in near or complete darkness. Even modest illumination for the entire 16-hour winter night would have consumed resources few could afford. A farmer who used enough candles to illuminate his home throughout the winter darkness might spend the equivalent of a milk cow, a prohibitive luxury. Segmented sleep offered a practical solution to this economic constraint. By remaining awake only during part of the night, typically the first evening hours and the watching period, families could concentrate their limited lighting resources when they were actually needed. The remaining hours could be spent in darkness, conserving precious fuel and illumination. This wasn't just frugality, it was necessity. The alternative would have been economically ruinous for most households. By adapting to darkness rather than fighting against it, medieval people developed a sustainable relationship with night that acknowledged economic realities. The watching period typically required minimal illumination, perhaps just the banked hearth fire, providing a gentle glow sufficient for quiet activities. This approach stretched limited resources while still allowing essential nocturnal tasks to be completed. The economics of medieval lighting didn't just influence sleep patterns, it shaped the entire relationship with darkness. Night wasn't an enemy to be vanquished with artificial light, but a presence to be accommodated through practical adaptations. Segmented sleep represented one of the most important of these adaptations. The medieval bedroom was nothing like ours. It was a survival chamber designed to manage darkness and cold. Architectural adaptations to extended night were sophisticated, practical, and essential for survival, particularly in northern regions where winter brought both profound darkness and potentially lethal cold. Archaeological evidence and surviving structures reveal how medieval homes were designed with night in mind. Unlike modern houses with their specialised rooms, medieval dwellings, particularly for common people, featured multi-purpose spaces that transformed from daytime work areas to nighttime sleeping chambers. The central feature in northern homes was typically the hearth, positioned to maximise heat distribution while minimising fire risk. Unlike modern fireplaces built into walls, medieval hearths often occupied the centre of the main room, allowing heat to radiate in all directions. Smoke escaped through a hole in the roof, or, in more advanced designs, through a rudimentary chimney. This central fire provided not just warmth, but the primary illumination during evening hours. Sleeping arrangements directly reflected the need to conserve heat and light. Most people didn't sleep in separate bedrooms, but gathered in the main room, often the only heated space. Archaeological floor plans and inventory records show that even prosperous homes had limited sleeping chambers, with family members sharing space for both practical and security reasons. The bed itself was a critical technology for night survival. Unlike modern beds designed primarily for comfort, medieval beds were engineered for warmth conservation. The typical bed was raised off the floor to avoid drafts and ground chill. Box beds, enclosed on 3 sides with curtains on the 4th, created a microclimate within the larger room. These curtains weren't decorative but functional, trapping body heat and creating a significantly warmer sleeping environment. In many northern regions, bed curtains were made from heavy wool or lined linen, essentially creating a room within a room. Wealthy households might use expensive imported fabrics, while common people relied on locally produced textiles, but the function remained the same: heat conservation through enclosed sleeping spaces. Window coverings played a crucial role in night management. Glass was prohibitively expensive for most households until the late medieval period. Instead, windows were typically covered with oiled parchment, thin horn, or wooden shutters. These coverings served multiple purposes: reducing heat loss, blocking wind, and in some cases, allowing a minimal amount of light to enter during daylight hours. At night, shutters would be tightly closed to retain precious heat. Bedding materials reflected both practical needs and economic status. Wealthier households used feather mattresses and down-filled pillows and coverlets. Those of more modest means relied on straw-filled mattresses, wool blankets and fur covers where available. The poorest might sleep on simple straw pallets covered with whatever textiles were available. Multiple layers were essential. Records suggest that even modest households might use 3 to 5 layers of covering during winter nights. The physical layout of sleeping spaces facilitated the segmented sleep pattern. The bed, positioned to benefit from hearth heat without fire risk, became the centre of nighttime activities. During the watching period, one might sit up in bed, perhaps adding an extra cloak or blanket, while engaging in quiet activities. The bed curtains created a relatively protected space where small tasks could be performed without heating the entire room. Archaeological evidence from surviving medieval homes shows that many had built-in bed niches or alcoves, spaces designed to maximise warmth efficiency by minimising the volume that needed to be heated by body warmth. These niches often included small shelves or storage spaces for items that might be needed during the night. Floor coverings changed seasonally, with additional layers added during winter months. Rush mats, straw, and occasionally woolen carpets in wealthier homes provided insulation against the chill rising from earth or stone floors. These coverings would be regularly replaced as they absorbed moisture and dirt. Clothing for sleep differed significantly from modern practices. While specialised sleepwear existed for the wealthy, most people simply wore lighter versions of daytime clothes or slept in undergarments. Nightcaps were nearly universal, as keeping the head warm was correctly understood to be essential for overall body temperature regulation. During particularly cold nights, many would sleep fully clothed, perhaps removing only outer layers. These architectural and practical adaptations weren't just about comfort, they were survival strategies. Historical records document numerous cases of hypothermia deaths during particularly harsh winters, especially among the elderly and very young. The design of sleeping spaces represented a sophisticated response to environmental challenges that modern heating systems have largely eliminated from our experience. The medieval approach to night spaces reveals a profound understanding of environmental management using limited resources. Rather than heating entire structures, which would have been prohibitively expensive in fuel terms, they created microenvironments where body heat could be effectively captured and conserved. This approach perfectly complemented the segmented sleep pattern, creating conditions where people could remain comfortable during waking periods without consuming additional resources. The midnight hours weren't for sleeping, they were for living. The period between first and second sleep, variously called the watch, the watching, or simply midnight, wasn't an inconvenient interruption, but a distinct phase of daily life. with its own customs, activities, and significance. Court records provide our most detailed glimpses into this forgotten waking hour. When witnesses testified about nighttime events, they frequently mentioned activities during this middle night period with remarkable specificity. A 1340th English court case describes a man rising after his first sleep to check on his property after hearing suspicious noises. A French case from 1437 mentions a woman who arose after her first sleep to prepare a poultice for her sick child. These casual references suggest the watching period was a normal time for practical activities. What exactly did people do during these midnight hours? The evidence points to a wide range of activities, some practical, others social or spiritual. Household security was a common concern. Many accounts mention checking on livestock, securing doors, or investigating unusual sounds. Fire tending was essential. The watching period provided an opportunity to bank the hearth fire, ensuring it would last until morning without requiring constant attention. Child and elder care often occupied this time. Nursing mothers would feed infants, while parents might check on children's covering during cold nights. Medical care frequently took place during the watching, applying poultices, administering medicines, or monitoring those with fever or injury. Many medical texts specifically recommended certain treatments be applied after first sleep, when the body was believed to be particularly receptive. Domestic tasks suited to low light conditions might be performed. Records mention food preparation for the following day, simple mending, or tool maintenance. These activities required minimal light and could be accomplished by the dim glow of a banked fire without consuming precious candles. The watching held particular importance for intellectual and creative work. Monastic writings frequently mention this time as ideal for contemplation and prayer. Scholars' diaries describe reading or writing during the midnight hours. The 16th century physician Laurent Joubert wrote that the period after first sleep was excellent for study and reflection, as the mind is refreshed and the body rested. This perception wasn't merely practical. Medieval understanding of human physiology suggested that the brain was especially clear during this time. Medical texts described the watching period as when vapours that clouded thinking during daytime had dissipated, but before the heaviness of deep night set in. Modern research on brain activity during segmented sleep patterns suggests there may be some biological basis for this perception, as certain types of brainwaves associated with creativity and insight are indeed more prevalent during middle night waking. Social interactions took distinctive forms during the watching. Conversation between bed partners, often the only truly private communication possible in crowded households, flourished during this time. Diaries and letters mention important decisions discussed, confidences shared, and plans made during these quiet hours. The 16th century French writer Noël Dufayel described the watching as when old wives' tales were told and family histories passed down. Sexual intimacy often occurred during the watching period rather than before first sleep. Medical texts and personal accounts suggest this timing was considered natural and beneficial. The 15th century marriage manual, The Good Wife's Guide, explicitly recommends conjugal relations after first sleep when the digestion is complete and the body rested. Birth records from several medieval communities show slight seasonal spikes that, counting back conception periods, suggest increased sexual activity during the longer watching periods of winter months. Religious observances structured the watching for many. Prayer books included specific devotions for this time. Monastic communities formalised this waking period into the night offices, structured prayers performed in the middle of the night. Even for lay people, private prayer during the watching was widely practiced. The quiet and darkness were considered conducive to spiritual reflection, and many reported more vivid religious experiences during this time than during daylight devotions. The watching served psychological purposes as well. The extended darkness of winter could be mentally challenging, and the structured waking period broke the night into manageable segments. Rather than facing 16 hours of continuous darkness, people experienced 2 shorter dark periods separated by productive wakefulness. This pattern reduced the psychological burden of extended night. What's striking in historical accounts is how normal and expected this waking period was. It wasn't described as insomnia or disrupted sleep, but as a natural part of the night's progression. People planned for it, anticipated it, and structured activities around it. It represented not a failure to sleep properly, but a different relationship with night altogether, one that incorporated wakefulness as an integral component rather than an unwelcome interruption. The watching period typically lasted between 1 and 3 hours, depending on season, individual preference, and practical needs. It wasn't rigidly timed, but flowed according to body rhythms and household requirements. This flexibility allowed it to serve multiple functions within the household economy. The disappearance of the watching from modern life represents not just a change in sleep patterns, but the loss of a distinct phase of human experience, a time of consciousness, unlike either daytime wakefulness or dream-filled sleep. It was a period of quiet contemplation, intimate connection, and practical activity that our consolidated sleep patterns no longer accommodate. As artificial light has conquered darkness and standardized work schedules have regularized our days, we've lost not just a sleep pattern, but an entire mode of being. The watching, a forgotten waking hour that was once central to human experience. Darkness created the only true privacy many would ever know. In the crowded conditions of medieval households, where multiple generations often shared a single room, the watching period between first and second sleep offered rare moments of genuine intimacy. This wasn't just about physical closeness, but emotional and social connection that daylight hours, filled with labour and often under the gaze of others, rarely permitted. Marriage manuals and medical texts from the period suggest that sexual relations frequently occurred during this midnight waking rather than before first sleep. The 15th century text, Le Ménagier de Paris, advises that conjugal intimacy, after some rest but before deep second sleep, was most conducive to conception and marital harmony. This timing wasn't merely preference, but considered medically sound. Physicians believed the body was more receptive after the digestion of the evening meal was complete. Court records inadvertently document this pattern when detailing conception claims in paternity cases. Testimonies frequently mention conception occurring after first sleep, or during the watching time, suggesting this was the customary period for marital relations. Parish birth registers from several English communities show subtle seasonal patterns that, counting backward from birth dates, align with the longer watching periods of winter months. For parents, the watching provided essential time for childcare that couldn't be accommodated during busy daylight hours. Nursing mothers would feed infants, often coordinating their own sleep cycles around their baby's needs. The medieval baby cradle, designed to be rocked from a seated or reclining position, reflects this practice, allowing mothers to nurse and soothe children while remaining in or near their own beds. Family bonds were nurtured during these quiet hours. Elder family members often used this time to share oral histories and practical knowledge with younger generations. A French peasant's journal from the early 16th century describes how his grandfather would speak of old times and battles during the midnight hours, passing down family lineages and community memories. These midnight narratives formed a crucial channel for cultural transmission, particularly in communities where literacy was limited. The watching created a distinctive type of conversation, more reflective and intimate than daytime communication. Surviving letters between spouses sometimes reference important decisions or emotional exchanges that occurred during these midnight wakings. A merchant's letter to his travelling wife in 1465 reminds her of what we resolved during our night talking before you departed. These conversations held special significance, occurring in a state of consciousness different from the practical mindset of daylight. For children, the watching could be both frightening and magical. Accounts suggest that older children were often awake during at least part of this time, listening to adult conversations or being told stories specifically reserved for these hours. Educational practices sometimes incorporated this period, with basic lessons or religious instruction occurring during the quieter midnight hours, when children might be more receptive to memorization. Pregnancy and childbirth transformed the experience of night. Midwives' manuals indicate that labour most commonly began during the watching period, perhaps due to hormonal patterns aligned with circadian rhythms. Birth attendants were accustomed to being summoned after first sleep, and many communities had specific signals for such emergencies. The watching provided a critical window for checking on pregnant women or new mothers, administering medicines or making preparations for imminent births. The elderly experienced the watching differently, often with more fragmented sleep patterns. Medical texts acknowledge that older people might have several wakings rather than the standard two-part pattern. These extended periods of wakefulness could be isolating, but also created opportunities for elders to fulfill night-watching responsibilities or engage in quiet crafts while younger family members slept. Their experience of night became a mark of age, a gradual transition from the standard biphasic pattern to a more polyphasic one. What emerges from these fragments is a picture of night as a crucial social space, not merely a time of unconsciousness, but a period when certain types of human connection flourished. The watching created a distinctive intimacy that helped bind families together through the shared experience of darkness and the unique consciousness it fostered. The midnight hours were when the veil between worlds grew thin. For medieval people, the watching period between first and second sleep wasn't just practically useful. It held profound spiritual and psychological significance. Dreams, night visions, and the distinctive consciousness of middle night waking were considered spiritually potent, offering insights unavailable during daylight hours. Medieval dream interpretation was a sophisticated practice, with roots in both classical learning and folk tradition. Medical texts classified different types of dreams according to their causes and significance. The influential 13th century medical compendium, attributed to Hildegard of Bingen, distinguished between dreams occurring during first sleep, believed to be influenced by the day's events and digestion, and those during second sleep, considered more prophetic and spiritually significant. Dreams experienced during or immediately after the watching period were accorded special attention. The 14th century dream interpretation manual, Somnia Danielis, Daniel's Dreams, specifically addresses visions that come after rising from first sleep and before returning to bed, claiming these had particular predictive power. Such dreams were carefully recorded and analysed, especially if they contained religious imagery or deceased relatives. Religious authorities had complex relationships with dream interpretation. Official church doctrine often discouraged excessive reliance on dreams as potentially demonic deceptions. Yet hagiographies, saints' lives, frequently featured significant dreams occurring during the watching period. The resolution to this apparent contradiction came through careful discernment. Dreams aligned with Christian teaching might be divine, while those promoting forbidden actions were attributed to demonic influence. Prayer books and devotional manuals prescribe specific practices for the watching period.